There is an order, a single command 2 words long, that is shouted in every army on the face of the earth. British, American, Russian, Chinese, Indian, French. Doesn't matter the flag, doesn't matter the century. When a column of soldiers marching in perfect rhythm approaches a bridge, an officer will turn and bellow 2 words. Break step. Stop marching in time, fall out of rhythm. Walk like a disorganized crowd of civilians. And almost no soldier who has ever obeyed that order has stopped to ask why. Why would an army, an institution that worships rhythm, that drills the lockstep into men until it is reflex, suddenly at the edge of a bridge, command its soldiers to stop being an army? The answer is a number, an invisible frequency hiding inside a structure of iron and stone that in 1831 listened to the footsteps of a column of soldiers, found one that matched it exactly, and fed on them, footstep by footstep, until it tore the bridge out from under their boots and dropped them into the river. This is the equation that every army on earth is quietly terrified of. The year is 1831. The place is Broughton, just outside Manchester, in the north of England, industrial England. The factories are roaring, the population is exploding. And a few years earlier, in 1826, a local landowner named John Fitzgerald paid to throw a brand new kind of bridge across the River Irwell. A suspension bridge. You have to understand how futuristic this was. In 1826, the suspension bridge was barely older than the steam locomotive. The deck doesn't sit on stone arches like a Roman bridge. Instead, it hangs. The whole roadway is slung from great wrought iron chains that swoop down from tall stone towers on either bank. Light, elegant, spanning gaps that no stone arch could ever cross. And though nobody used this word yet, springy, the man who designed it was named Samuel Brown, a former naval officer turned engineer who had patented his own flat-wrought, iron chain links and built several pioneering suspension bridges. Brown was a real innovator, but he was building at the absolute frontier of a technology that nobody fully understood yet. Here's the thing that should make the hair on your arms stand up. In 1831, there was no engineering theory, none, that told you how a bridge would vibrate. Builders could calculate more or less whether a bridge could hold a static weight. A heavy cart sitting still in the middle, they could do that arithmetic. But a bridge is not a static thing. A bridge moves. It flexes, it sways, it bounces. And the mathematics of how a structure responds to a moving, repeating force, that mathematics existed in fragments, in the notebooks of a handful of continental geniuses. It absolutely did not exist in the head of anyone standing on the bank of the River Irwell that day. And on the morning of April 12, 1831, walking toward that frontier bridge, was the one thing in the entire universe most perfectly designed to destroy it. Not a flood, not a storm, not an overloaded wagon. 74 men, the 60th Rifle Corps. An entire detachment of soldiers returning from a training exercise on Kersal Moor, marching home, in step. In beautiful, disciplined, lethal step. Let me set the scene exactly. The soldiers of the 60th Rifle Corps have spent the day drilling. They're tired, they're heading back to barracks, and they come to the Broughton Bridge. An officer leads them onto the deck, marching in column 4 abreast. Now, soldiers love a bridge. There is an old, almost universal habit among marching troops. When you cross a bridge and you feel it start to bounce gently under your feet, it is fun. The deck springs back at you. It is pleasant. It is like a child discovering a trampoline. So the men of the 60th, feeling the deck of the Broughton Bridge respond to their footsteps, did something that to them felt completely natural. They leaned into it. They matched their step to the bounce. And this is the moment the equation woke up. Because what the soldiers were doing without the faintest idea they were doing it, was driving the bridge. Every structure, every object that can flex has a natural rhythm, a frequency at which it wants to vibrate if you disturb it and let it go. Pluck a guitar string. It vibrates at its frequency. Tap a wine glass. It rings at its frequency. The Broughton Bridge had a natural frequency too. A slow, heavy bounce, maybe a couple of beats per second econned. And the men, feeling that bounce and unconsciously matching their footfalls to it, were now hitting the bridge with their boots exactly when the bridge was already moving down. Pushing it, at the precise instant it wanted to be pushed, over and over and over. Now here is the part that I think is genuinely beautiful and genuinely horrifying at the same time. A single man jumping on that bridge could do almost nothing. One soldier, even 74 soldiers walking like normal disorganized people. Their footsteps land at random times. Some push the bridge down, some push it as it is coming up. They cancel each other out. The energy goes nowhere. But 74 men in step are not 74 random pushes. They are one push repeated with machine precision. at the bridge's own secret frequency, and a structure that receives a small push perfectly timed again and again at exactly its natural frequency does not add those pushes. It multiplies them. So we have to stop here and ask the question that this entire channel exists to ask. Why? Why does a tiny, gentle, repeated push, a force so small that a single footstep barely registers, build into a force large enough to tear apart iron and stone? The intuitive answer is the pushes add up. That answer is true, but it is hiding the most beautiful idea in all of physics. The pushes don't just add, they add in resonance. And resonance is one of the strangest, most counterintuitive multipliers in the entire universe. Think about pushing a child on a swing. The swing has its own natural rhythm, back and forth, at a steady pace that depends only on the length of the chains. Now, you are a weak pusher. You can only give a tiny shove. If you shove at random times, sometimes as the swing comes toward you, sometimes as it goes away, you'll mostly just annoy the kid. Your energy fights itself. But if you give your tiny shove at exactly the right moment in every single cycle, right as the swing starts moving away from you, something extraordinary happens. Each small push lands on top of the motion, already there. The swing climbs higher and higher and higher. You, a weak pusher, can send a child terrifyingly high. Not because you are strong, but because you are perfectly timed. That is resonance, and the soldiers of the 60th were perfect pushers. The bridge was their child on a swing, and nobody on Earth in 1831 had the equation to tell them how high the swing would go. Here is the killer detail of resonance, the thing that makes it so dangerous. When you push something at its natural frequency, the amplitude, how far it swings, does not climb in a straight line. In a system with very little friction, with very little to bleed off the energy, the amplitude grows and grows, and the only thing that eventually limits it is the structure tearing itself apart. A guitar string can't shake itself to death. The air and the string's own stiffness bleed the energy away fast. But a long, springy, lightly damped iron suspension bridge, it is spectacularly bad at bleeding off energy. It holds the energy. It accumulates it. It is, in the most literal possible sense, a machine for storing the rhythm of marching boots and giving it nowhere to go, but bigger. So let's name the number. Every object that can flex and spring back has a natural frequency, the rate at which it vibrates when you disturb it and let it move freely. And there is a gorgeous, simple equation that governs it. For the simplest possible vibrating system, a mass hanging on a spring, the natural frequency F is equal to 1 over 2 pi times the square root of K over m, where K is the stiffness of the spring, how hard it resists being stretched, and m is the mass. Read that equation out loud and it tells you a little story. Stiffer thing, bigger K, vibrates faster, heavier thing, bigger m, and it is under the square root in the denominator, vibrates slower. That is it. That is the whole secret. A taut, light guitar string sings high. A loose, heavy bridge cable groans low. Now, the Broughton Bridge was not a simple mass on a spring. It was a complicated structure with many ways it could vibrate. But the principle is identical. The bridge had a stiffness, set by its iron chains and its deck. It had a mass, its own weight plus everything standing on it. And out of those two things came a natural frequency, a slow, heavy bounce, a few cycles per second econd, possibly less. Here is the catastrophe in a single sentence. The cadence of a marching column, the rate at which a body of soldiers strikes the ground, is also a few steps per second econd. A standard military quick march is around 120 steps per minute inute. That is 2 steps every second. 2 beats per second econd, which is terrifyingly right in the neighborhood of where a springy iron footbridge likes to bounce. And this is the whole game. The entire phenomenon lives or dies on one comparison. Does the frequency of the driving force, the boots, match the natural frequency of the structure, the bridge? If the two numbers are far apart, nothing happens. The bridge shrugs off the footsteps. You could march across it all day. But if those two numbers converge, if the marching cadence creeps into resonance with the bridge's natural bounce, then every footfall is a perfectly timed push on the swing, and the amplitude starts its terrible climb. The men of the 60th didn't choose this. They felt the bounce, and the human instinct to march in time with a rhythm you can feel is almost irresistible. The bridge taught them its own frequency, and then it punished them for learning it. So let's actually write down the equation that ripped the Broughton Bridge apart. We model the bridge as a driven, damped oscillator. That sounds intimidating. It is, I promise you. 3 ideas you already understand. First, the bridge has stiffness, which pulls it back toward flat whenever it is displaced. Second, the bridge has mass, which resists changing its motion. Third, the bridge has a little bit of damping, friction, and internal losses that try to bleed off the energy. And on top of all three, there is a driving force, the boots pushing rhythmically at some frequency. Write Newton's second law for that system, and you get the master equation of all of vibration. On the left side, mass times acceleration plus damping times velocity plus stiffness times displacement. The bridge fighting back, three different ways. On the right side, the driving force, the boots, pushing at a frequency we'll call omega. Now solve this thing, and out drops a quantity that should be carved over the door of every engineering school on Earth. The amplitude of the bridge's vibration, how far it swings, is proportional to the driving force, divided by a term that gets terrifyingly small when the driving frequency omega approaches the natural frequency. In the ideal, frictionless case, that denominator goes all the way to zero, and a finite force divided by a number approaching zero is a swing that approaches infinity. In the real world, of course, the amplitude doesn't actually reach infinity because there is always some damping, and because, long before infinity, the iron simply fails. A bolt shears, a link snaps. The structure runs out of strength before the equation runs out of growth. And notice what this equation does not contain. It does not contain the size of the force in any way that saves you. A small force, a footstep, at the resonant frequency produces a catastrophic response. A huge force at the wrong frequency produces almost nothing. The equation does not reward strength, it rewards timing, and 74 soldiers in step had given it the most perfect timing in the world. So now let us return to the morning of April 12, 1831, and watch the equation finish its work. The column is on the bridge, the deck is heaving, the chains are swinging in wide, sickening arcs. The soldiers near the front have begun to feel that this is no longer fun, that the motion has passed some line, when there is a sound. A sound the official accounts describe as like the report of a gun. One of the great iron bolts, the pin holding one of the chain links to the stonework of the pillar at the broughton end. Let's go. And once that single bolt fails, the equation stops being slow. The corner of the bridge it was holding drops away. The whole deck twists. The men on it are flung toward the collapsing side. The contemporary accounts describe the roadway tilting so violently that the soldiers were thrown into a heap, and then the entire end of the bridge fell, carrying the men down with it toward the river. About 40 soldiers go into the water and onto the riverbank below. And here is the single most extraordinary fact in this entire story. The fact that is the reason breakstep is an order and not an epitaph. Nobody died. The river Irwell at that point was shallow. Some men were injured, bruises, a few more serious, but every single soldier survived. The Broughton Bridge collapse is one of the most important structural failures in the history of engineering, and its body count is 0, which is exactly why the lesson got learned. Instead of buried, the inquiry that followed reached a conclusion that for 1831 was remarkably sharp. The investigators understood that the collapse was caused by vibration, specifically by the rhythmic, in-step marching of the soldiers setting up a motion that the bridge amplified. They didn't have the word resonance in the modern engineering sense, and they didn't have the differential equation, but they had seen, with their own eyes, the mechanism. A force that was trivial when random had become lethal when synchronized. And the response was immediate, and it was global, and it persists to this day. The British Army issued the order that when crossing a bridge, troops must break step, must deliberately walk out of rhythm so that their footfalls land at random times and never ever line up with the secret frequency of the structure beneath them. Every army on Earth adopted some version of the same command. The Broughton Bridge is the reason. Now here is the part of the story that I find genuinely haunting. The mathematics that explains exactly what happened on that bridge. The equation of the driven, damped oscillator, the resonance peak, the whole machinery. It already existed in 1831. It just didn't exist in the hands of anyone building bridges. The deep theory of vibration had been worked out decades and even a century earlier by some of the greatest mathematicians who ever lived, and almost none of them were thinking about bridges at all. Leonhard Euler and Daniel Bernoulli, working in the 1700s, had laid down the mathematics of vibrating beams and strings. The phenomenon of resonance, of a system responding enormously to a force tuned to its natural frequency, was understood. In the abstract, by mathematicians and by musicians who had felt it in sympathetic strings for centuries. The great French mathematician Joseph Fourier had shown, in 1822, that any repeating force could be broken down into a sum of pure frequencies, which is the very tool you need to ask, of any structure, what frequency is the world about to push you at? All of the pieces were on the table, and yet the engineer standing on the bank of the river Irwell in 1831 had no formal procedure that said, before you build a bridge that people will march across, calculate its natural frequency, and make sure no rhythmic human activity can match it. The math existed. The habit of applying it to bridges did not. Think about that gap. The same gap we keep finding on this channel. The catastrophe arrives first. The theory that could have prevented it is often already written, sitting in a book, in a language the people in danger never thought to read. The Broughton Bridge did not fall because the mathematics of resonance was unknown to humanity. It fell because the mathematics of resonance had not yet been made the responsibility of the people who build the things we walk on. And here is the redemptive turn. After Broughton, and after a string of other vibration disasters across the 19th century, that responsibility was assigned. Dynamic analysis became part of engineering. The natural frequency of a structure became a thing you must calculate. The order break step is the field expedient version of that equation. The answer compressed into 2 words. A frightened officer can shout in time to save the lives of men who will never know why. If you think the lesson of Broughton was learned cleanly and forever in 1831, I have a film to show you. Because resonance did not stop hunting bridges, it simply waited for one big enough to make the front page. On November 7, 1940, in Washington state, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, a vast, elegant, brand new suspension bridge, began to move in a wind of only about 40 miles per hour. Not a hurricane, a stiff breeze. And this time the rhythmic driving force was not soldiers. It was the wind itself, shedding vortices off the bridge deck at a frequency that fed energy into the structure's natural twisting motion. The bridge began to undulate, and then it began to twist, one side of the roadway rising while the other plunged, the whole deck corkscrewing through 45 degrees of rotation, over and over. For over an hour, Galloping Gertie, as the locals had already nicknamed her, writhed in the wind while engineers and reporters watched in disbelief. A man named Leonard Coatsworth had abandoned his car on the bridge. The only casualty of the entire disaster was his dog, Tubby, who could not be coaxed out. And then, just after 11 in the morning, the deck tore itself apart and crashed into the waters of Puget Sound. The Tacoma Narrows collapse is today the single most famous piece of footage in the history of engineering, shown to virtually every engineering student on Earth in their first year. The detailed physics is debated to this day. It was a complex aeroelastic phenomenon, not the simple textbook resonance of a marching column. But the moral is the same moral the soldiers of the 60th wrote into the river Irwell 109 years earlier. A modest, rhythmic, perfectly timed force will demolish a structure that a far larger random force could never touch. I want to leave you with the thought that makes this story, for me, one of the strangest of them all. We tend to imagine that the dangerous forces in the world are the big ones, the flood, the earthquake, the overloaded truck, and we build to resist those. We make things stronger, heavier, more massive. But resonance is the universe's reminder that strength is not the only axis of danger. A force that is utterly trivial in magnitude, the weight of a boot, the push of a breeze, the footstep of one tired soldier, can, if it is delivered in perfect time with a structure's hidden rhythm, accomplish what no single great blow ever could. The equation does not ask how hard you push. It asks when. Every army on Earth still shouts break step at the edge of a bridge. Most of the soldiers obeying it have never heard of Broughton, or the River Irwell, or the 60th Rifle Corps, or the driven damped oscillator. They just know the rule, fall out of rhythm, don't let the world catch you keeping perfect time. And in that one strange order, passed down for nearly 2 centuries from army to army, across every flag on the planet, lives an equation that most of the men obeying it will never see. Strange equations don't need you to understand them to collect what they're owed. The soldiers of the 60th didn't understand it either. The bridge ran it anyway. If you enjoyed this one, the Tacoma Narrows collapse, and the strange, beautiful argument over exactly why she danced herself into the sound, is a story for another day. Strange Equations is here for the math behind the moments that nobody at the time was calculating. If that is your kind of channel, subscribe. Thank you for watching.